The door creaked open. All eyes turned. A tall black man in a neatly pressed blue dress shirt stepped into the precinct lobby. No uniform, no badge in sight, just calm confidence in his stride and a briefcase in his hand. But to the officers watching from behind the front desk, that confidence didn't matter. The color of his skin did. Before he could take a third step forward, two officers, both white, both visibly irritated, intercepted him. Hey, where do you think you're going? One of them barked. The man stopped, turned, and calmly replied, I'm here on official business. But those words fell on deaf ears. The second officer stepped in closer, squinting suspiciously. Official business? He mocked. You don't look like no official to me. I'm asking you to step back, the man said evenly. I'm not here to cause a problem. But they didn't care. They didn't ask for ID. They didn't ask for his name. They didn't even ask why he was there. They just saw a black man in a place they didn't think he belonged, and they assumed the worst. Within seconds, things escalated. One officer shoved him against the wall, aggressively patting him down. The other yanked the briefcase from his hand and tossed it aside without opening it. The man didn't resist. He didn't yell. He simply said, This is a mistake. You'll regret this. But the louder he spoke, the harder they pushed. A file cabinet corner struck his forehead. Blood began to run down his temple. Still, he didn't raise a hand. He didn't fight back. Instead of following basic protocol, like calling a supervisor or verifying his identity, they reached for a rope they used for detaining rowdy suspects. Yes, a rope. They tied it around his torso like something out of the 1800s. Like he was some dangerous threat. All while shouting things like, Try to play slick, huh? You think you can just walk in here like you own the place? The man said nothing more, because he knew exactly what was happening. He had seen it before, not just on the news, but in real life. The automatic suspicion, the assumption of guilt, the disrespect disguised as procedure. But this time, they had no idea who they were dealing with. And that silence? It wasn't fear. It was power. Other officers started to gather around, watching the scene unfold. Some snickered, others remained silent. No one stepped in. No one said, Wait, who is he? They just stood there, letting the abuse happen. He sat in the corner of the station floor now, hands behind his back, rope around his body, forehead bleeding, treated like a trespasser or criminal. But even in that humiliating position, his eyes burned with calm defiance. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't panicking. He was just waiting. Waiting for the moment this entire room would be hit with the truth. Waiting for the exact second their smug faces would twist into regret. Because in just a few minutes, someone would walk in through that same front door, someone with authority, someone with power, and reveal a truth that would flip the entire precinct upside down. But right now, all they saw was what their bias allowed them to see. A black man who must be up to something. And they were about to learn, in the most humiliating way, just how wrong they were. As the man sat on the cold concrete floor, blood trickling slowly down the side of his face, the room carried on like nothing was wrong. Phones rang. Paperwork shuffled. Laughter echoed from one corner. Officers moved in and out, chatting about lunch plans, upcoming shifts, or last night's game. And right in the middle of it all, a man tied up, bruised, and treated like garbage. And not a single officer stepped in. Not one of them thought, Hey, this doesn't feel right. Not one asked, Who is he, really? They didn't need facts. They thought they already knew the truth. He was trouble. This is how racism hides in plain sight. Not just in slurs or violence, but in assumptions, in silence, in how quickly some people dehumanize others based on skin color, without even realizing they're doing it. To those officers, the man sitting tied up wasn't a professional. He wasn't a visitor. He wasn't someone important. He was just another black man who must have done something wrong. Because why else would he be here? That's the ugly truth of power abuse. When the people who are supposed to protect and serve everyone begin to only protect some and suspect the rest. When the badge becomes a shield not just from danger, but from accountability. And this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Not even in this very precinct. There have been whispers, complaints, grievances quietly dismissed or swept under the rug. Minority suspects roughed up without reason. Citizens ignored when they filed concerns. Internal affairs paperwork that somehow always ended up lost. But nobody said anything. Nobody wanted to rock the boat. Until now. This moment, right here, was different. Because this time, the person they were humiliating wasn't just a stranger off the street. He was someone with real authority. Someone with eyes watching. Someone who had been sent not just to observe the station, but to evaluate it. And the way they treated him was about to become Exhibit A in a case it didn't even know they were part of. Yet as he sat on the floor, not one of the officers even considered that possibility. They didn't think about cameras. They didn't worry about policies. They didn't fear consequences. Because that's what unchecked power does. It makes people arrogant. It makes them feel untouchable. They had no idea that every second of their mistreatment was being recorded. And not just with a security cam, but with a small body camera hidden inside the man's button-down shirt. Standard protocol for undercover visits like this. They had no idea that the moment he walked in, their actions were being tested, and that they had failed miserably. This was no routine check-in. This was no confused visitor. This was a test of character, and every officer in that room had just flunked. Still, they laughed. Still, they joked. Still, they walked past the bound man like he wasn't even there. But karma doesn't knock gently. It breaks down doors. And in just a few minutes, a door would open, not just physically, but metaphorically, and expose everything. Their assumptions, their prejudice, their unprofessionalism. Everything they thought they could hide was about to be dragged into the light. And when it was, there would be no denying what had happened here. Because racism doesn't need hoods or crosses. Sometimes, all it takes is a uniform and silence from those who should know better. Just as the tension in the room seemed to settle, the double doors to the precinct slammed open. The sound echoed like a clap of thunder. Every officer turned their head. In walked Captain Miller, a seasoned, no-nonsense commanding officer known for running a tight ship. His face twisted into confusion as he saw the man tied up on the floor, blood on his face, shirt wrinkled, briefcase tossed to the side like trash. His voice cut through the air like a blade. What the hell is going on here? The two officers who had done the tying, let's call them Officer Daniels and Officer Reed, froze. Daniels tried to speak, but stammered. Sir, we had a situation. This guy walked in unannounced. Wouldn't show ID. We thought he was a suspect. Captain Miller glared at him. Did he threaten you? No, sir. Did he resist? Well, no, sir, but did you ask who he was? There was silence. Cold, humiliating silence. That's when a man finally stood up, calmly, still bleeding slightly, but no longer silent. With quiet strength in his voice, he looked directly at the two officers and said, "You just made a career-ending mistake." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an ID, a gold-plated badge attached to a sleek leather wallet. He held it up so the whole room could see. Lieutenant James Carter, Internal Affairs. I'm your new commanding officer. The room went dead silent. Daniel's jaw dropped. Reed took a step back like he'd just seen a ghost. Other officers looked away, pretending they hadn't watched everything unfold. Captain Miller's eyes widened in shock. He immediately rushed over to untie the rope himself. Lieutenant, I didn't know. I had no idea. But Lieutenant Carter raised his hand to stop him. It's okay, Captain. You weren't here. But they were. And so were your cameras. He walked over to the front desk and picked up his briefcase, wiping the dust off with a sigh. You'll find a copy of today's visit order inside this case. Signed by the commissioner. He paused, letting that sink in. And by the way, he tapped a small black device clipped inside his shirt. I was wearing a body cam the whole time. Audio and video. Every insult. Every shove. Every rule you broke. It's all on here. Daniels looked like he might faint. Reed opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't get out a word. Lieutenant Carter turned and scanned the room slowly. The silence was suffocating now. The kind of silence that only follows after truth hits like a train. He continued. Some of you watched. Some of you laughed. And not one of you stepped in to stop it. He pulled out a small notepad from his pocket, flipped it open, and said, I've got names. I've got faces. And starting today, every one of you will be reviewed, not just for how you act in the field, but for what you allow inside these walls. The mood in the room shifted from awkward embarrassment to pure fear. Because this wasn't a lecture. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. This was Judgment Day. And the worst part? They weren't being punished by a stranger or outsider. They were being held accountable by their own superior. Someone who looked nothing like them, but outranked every last one of them. It wasn't just a plot twist. It was a mirror, showing them exactly who they had become. And Lieutenant Carter? He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for justice. The moment the truth was out, panic set in. The officers who had laughed minutes earlier now looked pale. The ones who stood by silently were suddenly shifting uncomfortably, avoiding Lieutenant Carter's gaze. And the ones who had tied him up? They were sweating bullets. Officer Daniel stuttered as he stepped forward, hands shaking. "Lieutenant, I am so sorry. I didn't know. It was a misunderstanding. You have to believe me." Lieutenant Carter didn't raise his voice. He didn't even flinch. He simply asked, "Would it have made a difference if you had known who I was?" Daniels froze. Because the truth was, no, it wouldn't have. The way they treated him wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about instinct, assumption, bias. Officer Reed spoke next, almost pleading. We thought you were a suspect. You came in all quiet, no ID, and that gave you permission to tie me up?" Carter cut in. "To slam my head against the cabinet? To humiliate me in front of your colleagues, like I was beneath you?" No answer. Just guilt hanging in the air like fog. Captain Miller stepped forward, trying to take control. "Lieutenant, I deeply apologize. This behavior is unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for what happened under my command." Carter looked at him. "You should, but it's not just about you, Captain. It's about this entire system. This station doesn't have a bad apple problem. It has a culture problem." He paused. Then he pulled out his phone and pressed play. Click. The room filled with the crystal-clear audio of the abuse he had just endured. "Get on the wall. Don't play smart boy. Looks like we caught ourselves another one." Every word, every shove, every racial slur, recorded. The faces around him twisted in shame. The playback was short, less than 5 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. When it ended, Carter looked each of them in the eyes. "You may have thought no one was watching," he said, "but I was. And now the entire Internal Affairs Division will be." He handed a small USB stick to Captain Miller. "This contains the footage and my formal report. Effective immediately, Officers Daniels and Reed are suspended pending a full investigation. Any officer who stood by silently will be placed under review." The room buzzed with quiet gasps. Some lowered their heads. Others whispered, panicked. But it was too late. Regret doesn't erase damage. Apologies don't undo injustice. And silence from bystanders makes them just as guilty. Lieutenant Carter turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "You didn't just tie up a man today," he said. "You tied up your own careers. You tied yourselves to a moment that will follow you. Because what you did wasn't just unprofessional. It was inhumane." He looked at the rope on the floor, still coiled where they had left it, and added one last thing. "The only thing more dangerous than a racist cop is a quiet one." With that, he walked out, leaving behind a room full of stunned officers and shattered reputations. And just like that, the man they dismissed as nobody had just dismantled their entire illusion of power. Not with violence, not with revenge, but with truth, authority, and dignity. The following morning, a different energy filled the station. No one was laughing. No one was joking. The same officers who had mocked a man tied up on their floor now sat upright at their desks, nervously shuffling papers or avoiding eye contact altogether. Every corner of the room carried the weight of what had happened the day before. Whispers had turned into official memos. Suspension letters have been filed. Internal Affairs is reviewing body cam footage. Someone's going to lose their badge. But what truly shook the precinct wasn't the fear of punishment. It was the realization that their behavior, something many had gotten away with for years, had finally caught up with them. At 9 a.m. sharp, the doors to the briefing room opened, and in walked Lieutenant James Carter. No rope, no wounds, no silence. Today, he wore his uniform. The gold badge gleamed on his chest, and his posture carried the calm strength of a man who had earned his authority, not through fear or intimidation, but through integrity. The room stood up automatically. A few mumbled, "Good morning, sir." Others stayed silent, unsure of what was coming. Lieutenant Carter stepped to the front of the room, placed his hands on the podium, and let the silence settle before he spoke. Yesterday, he began, you didn't just disrespect a man. You disrespected this uniform. Eyes dropped to the floor. You assumed I didn't belong here, that I was beneath you, that because I didn't look like you, or walk like you, or talk the way you expect, that I was a threat. He took a breath. But here's the truth. I wasn't the threat yesterday. You were. No one spoke. No one dared to. Carter continued, walking slowly across the front of the room as he spoke. Racism in policing doesn't always wear a hood or shout slurs. Sometimes it wears a badge. Sometimes it stands silent while injustice happens 2 feet away. He stopped and looked at a young officer sitting near the back. You saw what was happening. You looked right at me, and you chose to walk away. Do you think silence makes you innocent? The officer looked stunned. He tried to respond, but couldn't get a word out. Lieutenant Carter turned back to the rest of the group. If I had been someone without a badge, without a title, without connections, I might have ended up in a jail cell. Or worse. And that's when he clicked the remote in his hand, projecting an image on the screen behind him. It was the rope, lying on the floor where they had left it. This, he said, is a symbol of everything wrong with how some of us wear this badge. This isn't just about racism. It's about culture. About who you protect, who you punish, and who you pretend not to see. He paused, then changed the slide to one that read, you cannot protect a community you do not respect. I'm not here to ruin your careers, he said. I'm here to rebuild your character. From that day forward, the precinct was no longer just a station. It was a proving ground for change. Mandatory bias and de-escalation training were implemented. Anonymous reporting systems were installed. Regular town halls were held with the community they served. And every single officer, from rookies to veterans, was required to retake their oath. Not just the one they recited when they joined, but a new one, written by Lieutenant Carter himself. I swear to protect and serve with honor, without prejudice, without ego, and without excuse. I will not judge a citizen by their appearance, but by their humanity. And I will not remain silent in the face of injustice, even when it comes from my own. It wasn't just words. It was a shift, a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. And while not every officer embraced it immediately, they couldn't ignore what had happened. Because Lieutenant Carter didn't lead with revenge. He led with example. He showed them what leadership really looks like. Not barking orders, not demanding respect, but earning it. And perhaps the most remarkable part? He forgave them. Not because they deserved it, but because he refused to carry their hate. Forgiveness, he told them one day, isn't letting you off the hook. It's freeing myself from your chains. Clapperboard final words to the audience, call to action. This story isn't just about one man or one precinct. It's about a larger truth. We don't rise by humiliating others. We rise by choosing character over cruelty and courage over comfort. Lieutenant Carter's story teaches us this. Real power doesn't come from a badge or a gun. It comes from how you treat people when no one's watching. So if this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe to help us shine a light on real stories that need to be heard. And remember, silence is complicity, but courage? Courage creates change.